The ties that bind. In my mother's kitchen is an area of countertop about 3 feet long. Nestled between the stove and the sink, this is the only workspace my mama ever had, and it is there that over the course of 55 years she prepared breakfast, dinner, that's the southern version of lunch, and supper. When I was a small child, Mama would place me on the corner of this space so that she could keep an eye on me while she was cooking. I remember clearly watching her mash potatoes and flour chicken for frying. She would hum or sing snatches of popular tunes while she worked. Our house always smelled like garlic, or even better, like vanilla when there was a pound cake baking in the oven. About once a week, I would wake up to the lingering smell of the catfish fry the night before. My friends' houses smelled like flowers or Lysol. My house invited friends inside with the enticing smell of something good to eat. Those are some of my earliest memories, and those memories of watching my mama cook have become an essential part of who I am. During adolescence, I didn't spend much time in the kitchen. Oh, occasionally I would make a batch of brownies or Toll House cookies, but for the most part the kitchen belonged to Mama. Then when I went away to college, I was faced with the choice to cook or starve. I cooked. Surprisingly, I was a very capable chef in spite of my lack of experience. As I have continued to cook meals for my husband and children, I have often wondered if during those early years while dangling my legs over the edge of the counter, I absorbed some of my mama's skill and technique. As a young wife and mother, I would frequently pick up the telephone and call Mama asking how to make this or that. She would instruct me, and I would grab anything handy, an old envelope, the back of a note card, the torn bottom half of a page of yellow legal pad, and scratch out a list of ingredients and instructions. Sometimes, if I were at Mama's house, she would write down the recipe for me or hand me her own copy, or offer my grandmother's version, written by hand and often stained with a drip or splatter of some ingredient. There were certain recipe books that I remember. Crisp County Cooking, the Cordell Woman's Club cookbook. Southern Cooking by Mrs. S.R. Dull, which, according to my mother, is a must for any kitchen. And ultimately, 1 or 2 Southern Living cookbooks. As a working mother of 3, I never had time to organize my recipes. Like my mother, I also accumulated a nice little collection of recipe books, some that Mama shared with me and others that I purchased on my own. Whenever I got a recipe from Mama, I would simply shove the scrap of paper between the pages of one of my recipe books in anticipation of the day when I would file everything away properly. My Mama died in 2002 after a protracted illness. Although her death was expected, her absence in my family created a disorder and emptiness that none of us anticipated. Then on April 11th, 2003, tragedy struck again. The day was already to be an eventful one, since it was prom day for my oldest daughter. I was not only helping her to get ready for the evening, but I also had invited her friends and their dates to come over after prom for a traditional breakfast. I had tucked away in the refrigerator fresh fruit and breakfast casseroles made from Mama's recipe, and I had planned to prepare cheese grits and ham biscuits later in the evening. Now, anyone who doesn't have a teenage son or daughter might not understand that prom festivities begin around midday. For the girls, the activities began with the obligatory hair and nail appointment. Then there is the meeting of the limo, the picture time for parents, the photography at the professional studio, the drive out of town to an expensive restaurant, the drive back to the prom site. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it is the way of my people. so preparations must begin early. I left work at noon that day so that I could help Grace dress. I fixed her lunch, hot dogs and tater tots, while she soaked and shaved and plucked and primped. As soon as we had finished lunch, she had a hair appointment, so I left a dirty kitchen in order to take her to the stylist. When we returned, Gracie finished her preparations while I tackled the kitchen. The frying pan, filled with now cold oil, was the first order of business. I generally store and reuse cooking oil, but cold oil is difficult to pour, so I put the pan back on the stove and turned up the heat to warm it. The doorbell rang, and the prom date, a nervous young man with bouquet in hand, had arrived. I ushered him inside and began to pin on his boutonniere. Then Grace emerged, looking like a belle from Gone with the Wind. I helped her get into the car, ballroom gown, evening bag, flowers and all, and then checked my watch. If I left immediately, I would have time to pick up my youngest from school and arrive at the home where the limo would pick up the kids and where parents could make pictures. I grabbed my purse and ran. Soon I found myself surrounded by carefully coiffed young ladies, sparkling like prisms with rhinestones and sequins. As usual, the girls huddled together, admiring each other's nails and posing for pictures. The boys pulled at their collars and desperately looked for the time when they could shed their jackets. Suddenly, I was called to the telephone, a very odd occurrence. The voice on the line said, "Is this Mrs. Hunt?" "Yes," I replied. "Mrs. Hunt, this is the sheriff's office. You need to call your husband right away." She gave no more information. Immediately, I began to panic. Was someone sick? Had there been an accident? As soon as my husband answered the phone, he frantically blurted, "Someone called and said our house is on fire. Is anyone at home? Is anyone inside?" I assured him that the house was empty, and then I remembered. Clearly and without a doubt, I explained. I left a pan of grease on the stove. I hung up the phone and hurried away to see what was left of my home. When oil catches fire, it basically explodes. The flames had shot straight up from the stove, burning the ceiling and everything around the stove. The attic caught fire, and air currents flowing through the vents in each end pulled the flames through the attic, destroying everything there, including the roof. The kitchen and attic were totally destroyed, but the house was still standing. However, heat and smoke had snaked through every room, marring and penetrating each surface. Furniture, rugs, clothing, and bedding would all have to be replaced. I knew everything stored in the attic was gone. My children's Christmas decorations, smocked day gowns and dresses that I had made for my girls, even the rocking horse I had as a child. Of course, the kitchen was unrecognizable. It looked like a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie set. There was no roof. The refrigerator door was burned off, displaying the blackened contents, including the breakfast casseroles. The floor was a pile of black, wet ash mingled with bits and pieces of my life. After the fireman gave permission to go inside, I walked through this shell that was once my home. Precious things were lost. I could see that my children's portraits were destroyed. Old boxes filled with photos were now wet from the fire hoses. There was no smell of something delectable, no trace of garlic, vanilla, or something frying. Even the smell of those tater tots had disappeared, burned out by the unmistakable stench of smoke that seems to seep into the pores and lingers even when the last ember is extinguished. As I walked, I began to comprehend the damage and the loss, but I held my emotions in check. I come from a line of strong women who believe in standing up to life's adversities. Steel magnolias, one might say. I made another pass through the kitchen and this time some splashes of color peeking through the ash on the floor caught my eye. What was that covered by ash? Cereal boxes? Can labels? Then it hit me. I was standing on the ruins of my recipe books. My books, my mama's books, all those handwritten recipes scratched down on odds and ends and tucked away. My mama's handwriting, my grandmother's, gone. Then for the first time since I had answered that phone call, the tears came and I began to sob. I could feel my memories gasping for air. I suppose that for me, the kitchen was the heart of the home, and the family recipes were the ties that bind generations together. My mind was flooded with memories of Mama brushing her hair from her forehead with flour-coated hands as she handed me the spoon to lick or gave me the hand mixer and let me help. Of Sunday dinners at my grandmother's, replete with aunts, uncles, cousins, and Mima's famous Creole salad, made with macaroni, tomatoes, cheese, and olives. I thought of that tiny corner where my mama had prepared so many meals. Then I thought of my own children and our tradition of making and decorating Christmas cookies. How by the time the children finished decorating, those poor sprinkle-coated cookies were inedible, but the children pronounced them wonderful. I thought of showing my children how to make divinity without a candy thermometer, watching the heated syrup and lifting the spoon to see if the sugar would spin a thread. My mother taught me the tricks of candy making, just the way her mother taught her. So many connections. And were they broken now? Had my own carelessness destroyed those ties? I looked around the heart of my home, now a black and silent coffin, and I wept. My house has been rebuilt. In fact, it is bigger and better since we added an upstairs and I remodeled my kitchen. But I realized through this experience that the house doesn't matter. It is simply a storage place for stuff. Stuff I can replace if I choose, or stuff I can simply live without. I know now that the kitchen is not the heart of the home, and the recipes are not the ties that bind. The heart of the home is the family that gives it life, and the ties that bind are the relationships that we develop with friends and loved ones. I hear their voices, and I remember. Don't stir that whipped cream in. You have to fold it. Egg whites don't beat well when there's too much humidity in the air. If you add a little sugar in with your turnip greens, they won't be bitter. Don't use a spoon to mix that Creole salad. It has to be done by hand. I carry on the traditions passed down from my grandmother to my mother to me. I prepare meals for a family to share. I create dishes for a table that becomes a refuge, a place where friends can gather. I carry on the tradition of strength when life is smoldering around me. Fire, flood, even a slow death cannot destroy a relationship. I keep those relationships alive. I hold the family recipes in my heart, and with every opportunity, I write one down on whatever is handy and pass it along to someone I love.